Welcome back. We're picking up where we left off. We're closing out the Ezra-Nehemiah material today by turning our full attention to the book of Nehemiah itself.
Right, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it is a fitting conclusion to this sequence because by the end of our time today, we will finally be in a position to weigh in properly on a question we've been circling since we began this deep dive.
The unity question, right?
Exactly. Whether Ezra and Nehemiah were ever genuinely one single book, or whether that unity is a later editorial construction laid over two originally separate compositions.
And we do have a clear roadmap for you today as we get into this. We are going to begin with a narrative and historical overview. So setting the scene in the Persian court and then moving to the streets of Jerusalem.
Right.
From there, we will transition into the analytical questions. First, we will examine the Nehemiah Memoir as a specific literary genre. Second, we will look at his opponents.
Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem.
Yes, and we'll examine the extra-biblical evidence that proves who they really were. Third, we will analyze the covenant renewal of chapters 8 through 10, contrasting it with the unraveling of those reforms in chapter 13.
Which is a heavy transition.
It is. And then finally, we will answer that overarching unity question and then close with a personal devotional reflection for you.
So we begin in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. This is in the Persian royal court at Susa. Based on the traditional chronology, we are in the year 445 BC.
Which is a very specific anchor point.
It is. And the first thing to note here is that we are following a very different kind of protagonist. I mean, we spent our last discussion focused on Ezra.
Right, and Ezra was a priest and a scribe.
Yeah, but Nehemiah is neither of those things. He is a courtier. Specifically, the text tells us he is the king's cupbearer.
Which is such a fascinating detail.
It is, and I want to pause on that because I think it is easy to hear the word cupbearer and picture, a glorified waiter.
Right.
But this is a position of immense political weight, isn't it?
It is a position of absolute trust. A cupbearer in the Achaemenid Persian court was not a servant in the traditional sense. He was a highly elite official.
Right, because of the security risks.
Exactly. His primary function was to guard the king against assassination by poison, which meant he was tasting the king's wine before serving it. You have to consider the level of physical intimacy and unmediated access this requires.
He is right there, constantly.
Yes. Nehemiah is a Jewish exile, right? A descendant of a conquered people, yet he has risen to the innermost circles of imperial power. He is in the physical presence of the most powerful monarch in the region on a daily basis.
Which I think makes his reaction to the news from Jerusalem all the more stark. I mean, Nehemiah is living in imperial luxury. He's behind the secure walls of a fortified palace complex.
It's safe and sound.
Very safe. Then his brother, Hanani, arrives from Judah with a report. And the report is devastating.
It really is.
Hanani tells him that the survivors of the province are in deep distress and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem lies broken down, and its gates have been destroyed by fire.
So the city is undefended, completely vulnerable, and deeply humiliated.
Yeah, and Nehemiah does not respond with immediate action or political calculation.
No, he doesn't start plotting right away.
Right. The text records that he sits down and weeps. He mourns for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. This is a profound, extended period of grief.
And this visible distress eventually carries over into his royal duties.
Which is dangerous.
Very. While serving wine, Artaxerxes notices Nehemiah's sorrow. He asks him directly why his face is sad, noting that this must be a sadness of the heart.
Right, because to show visible distress in the presence of an ancient Near Eastern monarch carried severe risks.
You did not want to bring a bad mood into the throne room.
No, the king's presence was supposed to be a place of perfection and joy. Bringing personal grief into that space could easily be interpreted as a slight against the king.
Or worse, a sign of nervous guilt.
Yes, which is the very last thing you want from the man who is tasting your wine for poison.
Exactly. If the cupbearer looks anxious, you assume he poisoned the cup.
Right. But Nehemiah uses the moment. He explains the ruin of his ancestral city, and he petitions Artaxerxes for leave to travel to Judah to rebuild it.
And the king actually grants the request. And he does so with the full backing of the empire.
He doesn't just let him go, he equips him.
Yeah, Artaxerxes provides Nehemiah with letters of safe passage directed to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates region.
The paperwork to get through safely.
Exactly. He also provides a specific letter to Asaph, who is the keeper of the king's forest, authorizing the extraction of timber for the city gates and the wall. So Nehemiah leaves Susa equipped with royal authority, materials, and a military escort.
So Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem. But he does not announce his intentions right away.
He is very strategic about it.
He is. He waits 3 days, keeping his counsel. Then he conducts a secret survey of the city's ruins by night.
I always find the scene so compelling.
It is vivid. He rides out through the valley gate, past the jackal's well, inspecting the broken sections of the wall and the burnt gates in the dark. He takes the full measure of the devastation before speaking to the priests or the nobles or any of the officials.
He wants to know exactly what he's dealing with first.
Right. Only after this silent, granular assessment does he rally the community. He tells them of the king's letters and proposes that they rebuild the wall to end their disgrace.
And the community agrees. Chapter 3 documents the resulting construction in exacting detail.
It is a very long list of names and gates.
It is, but it shows the scale of it. The text lists the workforce family by family, official by official. You have high priests, goldsmiths, perfume makers, and even daughters of district rulers recorded working side by side.
Everyone is pitching in.
Yeah, they take responsibility for specific sections of the wall and specific gates. They are working around the entire circuit of the city simultaneously. It is a massive mobilization of labor.
And the wall goes up at breakneck speed.
It really does.
But this rapid construction triggers immediate regional pushback. The text introduces 3 recurring antagonists here. Sanballat, the governor of Samaria to the north, Tobiah, an Ammonite official, and Geshem, an Arab.
Right, the neighbors are not happy.
No. Initially, they use mockery and intimidation. They accuse Nehemiah of planning a rebellion against the Persian king. But when the wall reaches half its intended height, the mockery escalates into credible threats of armed attack.
And Nehemiah's response to this is entirely pragmatic.
He doesn't stop building.
No, he doesn't halt the work at all. But he arms the workers. He stations armed guards at the vulnerable points and requires the builders to work with a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other.
A trowel and a sword.
Exactly. Half the workforce stands guard with spears, shields, and bows while the other half builds. The threat of violence becomes so acute that Nehemiah and his immediate retinue do not even take off their clothes to sleep.
So when military intimidation fails, Sanballat and his allies shift their tactics. They move to targeted assassination and political entrapment.
They get a bit more subtle.
Yeah, they repeatedly send messages to Nehemiah, inviting him to meet on the plain of Ono. This is well outside the safety of Jerusalem.
It's a clear trap.
Right. And Nehemiah recognizes this as a trap to kill him, and he refuses to leave the city. So then they hire a prophet named Shemaiah to deliver a false oracle.
This is a really insidious tactic.
It is. Shemaiah warns Nehemiah that assassins are coming at night, and he urges him to hide inside the temple sanctuary.
Which is a highly calculated move on their part.
Yeah.
Because Nehemiah is a layman, right? He's not a priest.
Right.
So entering the inner sanctuary of the temple would be a severe sacrilege under Torah law. It is a direct attempt to ruin his religious standing and discredit his leadership among the Jews.
Because if the governor violates the sanctity of the temple just to save his own skin, he loses all moral authority.
Precisely. But Nehemiah sees through the deception and he refuses to flee.
So despite all this relentless external pressure, the community finishes the wall, and they do it in an astonishing 52 days.
It is incredibly fast.
But the external threats are matched by an internal crisis. In Chapter 5, the narrative interrupts the building account to detail a severe economic breakdown.
Right, things are falling apart from the inside.
Yeah, there is a famine. And the poorer citizens are taking on heavy debt just to buy grain and to pay the Persian royal taxes.
And the creditors holding these debts are their own wealthier countrymen, the Jewish nobles and officials.
Which makes it so much worse.
It does. The poor are mortgaging their fields, their vineyards, and their homes, and when they inevitably default, they are being forced to sell their own sons and daughters into debt slavery.
And Nehemiah is enraged when he hears this outcry. He convenes a great assembly and publicly confronts the nobles.
He calls them out in front of everyone.
He does. He shames them for exploiting their brothers, pointing out that he and others have been spending their own money to redeem Jewish slaves from foreign nations, while these nobles are essentially enslaving them all over again.
Right. He demands an immediate cancellation of the debts and the return of the mortgaged lands.
And the nobles actually concede. Nehemiah binds them with an oath. So, with the internal economic crisis stabilized, the narrative moves into chapters 8 through 10. And this is really an emotional and theological peak.
It is a massive shift in tone.
The people gather in the square before the water gate. Ezra the scribe, who has been totally absent from the Nehemiah narrative up to this point, steps forward. He stands on a high wooden platform and he reads the Torah aloud to the assembly from daybreak until noon.
And when the people hear the words of the law, they begin to weep.
Hits them hard.
Yeah, but Nehemiah, Ezra, and the Levites halt the mourning. They instruct the people to celebrate, to eat choice food and drink sweet wine because this day is holy.
They don't want it to be a day of sorrow.
Right. And this leads directly into the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, and it is observed with a level of communal participation that the text claims had not been seen since the days of Joshua.
Following this festival, the community seals a formal, written covenant document. They commit themselves to observe the Sabbath, forego the exaction of debts in the 7th year, pay the temple tithes, and prohibit intermarriage with the surrounding peoples.
It feels like everything is fixed.
It does. But then we reach chapter 13, and the narrative abruptly unravels. We are told that Nehemiah returned to the Persian court for an unspecified number of years. When he eventually returns to Jerusalem, he finds that the reforms he implemented have completely collapsed.
It didn't hold at all.
No. Tobiah the Ammonite, one of the primary opponents of the wall, has actually been granted a large storage room inside the temple courts by the high priest.
It is unbelievable. The people have stopped bringing in the tithes, which forces the Levitical singers to abandon their temple duties and return to their farms just to survive.
The system is broken.
Completely. People are treading wine presses and bringing loaded donkeys into Jerusalem to sell goods on the Sabbath, and the issue of intermarriage has returned.
And Nehemiah's reaction to this collapse is severe.
He does not hold back.
No, he personally throws all of Tobiah's household goods out of the temple chamber. He stations his own guards at the city gates to lock out the merchants on the Sabbath.
And when he discovers that one of the grandsons of Eliashib, the high priest, has married the daughter of Sanballat, the governor of Samaria, Nehemiah, physically drives the man away from him.
It is a violent reaction. And the narrative ends abruptly with an exhausted prayer from Nehemiah. He just says, "Remember me, oh my God, for good."
Which is such a haunting way to end it.
Yeah.
And that narrative sequence naturally brings us to the scholarly framing for our discussion today. The shape of this story naturally begs 3 major scholarly questions.
Right. So we are pivoting now from the narrative storytelling to the core analytical questions.
No.
Here is the framework we will be using to understand the text.
Okay.
First, what kind of document is the Nehemiah Memoir? How does understanding its specific literary genre change how we read Nehemiah's self-presentation?
That's a big one.
Second, who were these opponents, really? How do extra-biblical sources move them from flat antagonists to real political threats? And third, what is happening theologically? How do we reconcile the triumphant covenant renewal of chapters 8 through 10 with the unraveled reforms of chapter 13?
Because answering those 3 questions will finally equip us to resolve the overarching unity question of the Ezra-Nehemiah corpus.
Let's get into it.
So let us address the first analytical point, the Nehemiah Memoir as a distinct literary genre.
Okay.
Chapters 1 through 7 and sections of chapters 12 and 13 are written in the first person.
Right. I did this, I did that.
Yes. Nehemiah is speaking directly to the reader, or more accurately, directly to God. He says, "I was cupbearer, I contended with the nobles, I rose in the night."
And alongside that distinct voice, there is a recurring formula. Nehemiah repeatedly asks God to remember him for his good deeds and to remember his enemies for their bad ones.
It happens throughout the text and, as you noted, serves as the closing line of the book.
Yeah. So for a long time, readers approached this as a kind of private, deeply personal diary. Just a guy pouring his heart out.
Right. But Jacob Wright's study, Rebuilding Identity, changes how we evaluate this material.
How so?
Wright conducts a comparative analysis. He links the memoir to a well-documented genre in the ancient Near East, which is royal and administrative building inscriptions, often called votive inscriptions.
Okay.
Throughout the ancient Near East, when a ruler or a high official completed a major construction project, like a temple restoration or a city wall, they commemorated the achievement by writing an inscription.
To leave a record.
Yes, but the specific purpose was to present the completed work to a deity. They were justifying their deeds in exchange for favorable remembrance, long life, or dynastic protection.
So if we apply this genre comparison, how does it shift our reading? Because honestly, to a modern ear, some of Nehemiah's first-person interjections read as incredibly arrogant.
They do sound a bit boastful.
Yeah, like in chapter 5, he spends time detailing exactly how much food he paid for out of his own pocket to feed 150 officials at his table. He boasts that he never demanded the food allowance allocated to him as governor, and he insists that God take note of it.
Right.
If you approach that as a personal diary, it sounds like an ego trip.
And that is precisely where the comparative material is illuminating. It reframes what we perceive as arrogance or personal piety into standard genre conventions.
Oh, so it's expected.
Exactly. In an ancient Near Eastern building inscription, self-commendation is actually required. A votive inscription must detail the expenditures, the personal sacrifices, and the righteous administration of the builder to justify the request for divine favor.
So it's not bragging, it's just the format.
Yes. Nehemiah, detailing his own generosity and his refusal to burden the people, is a formalized accounting of a completed project presented to a deity. The remember me formula is the functional equivalent of a Babylonian king asking a god for blessings after dedicating a temple.
So Wright takes this analysis into a broader compositional debate, doesn't he?
He does. He argues that if this text started as a building inscription, it was likely very brief initially, perhaps just a short account of the wall's construction.
And then it grew.
Right. He suggests that over successive generations, editors expanded this core text, inserting the social reform material of Chapter 5 and the religious reforms of Chapter 13.
But the scholarly consensus on Wright's work is nuanced.
Very nuanced. In a 2007 exchange in the Journal of Hebrew Scriptures, scholars including Gary Knoppers, David Carr, and Ralph Klein responded to Wright.
And what do they say?
They expressed deep respect for his identification of the genre and the insight it provides into the text's function. However, they demonstrated skepticism toward his exact layer-by-layer reconstruction of how the text grew over time.
It's hard to be that precise.
Exactly. They cautioned that disentangling editorial layers with that level of precision is highly speculative.
Which provides a contrast with the older consensus, maintained by scholars like Sigmund Mowinckel and Ulrich Kellerman.
Right. They viewed the first-person material as a genuine literary unity and an authentic underlying source.
So in their view, the memoir is not a free theological invention constructed layer by layer over centuries by later editors.
No, they see it as a cohesive document rooted in the actual administration of Nehemiah.
So the essential point for you as a listener is that when you encounter Nehemiah's self-praise and his pleas for remembrance, you are not reading the unedited journal of a proud man.
No.
You are reading a specialized, ancient form of political and theological documentation. It is an apologetic text designed to defend a governor's administration before God and the community, structurally parallel to the monuments of the empires that surrounded Judah.
Which brings us to our second analytical question, focusing on the opponents. The text names Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem.
Right.
And if you only read the biblical text, they can seem like flat antagonists. They stand outside the wall, they hurl insults, they plot in the shadows.
Almost like cartoon villains.
Exactly, but extra biblical evidence completely alters our understanding of who these men were and what was actually at stake here.
We begin with Sanballat the Horonite, the governor of Samaria. For a long time, we had no external proof of his existence.
Not at all.
But that changed with the discovery of the Elephantine papyri. These are Aramaic documents from a Jewish military colony in southern Egypt, dating to the late 5th century BC, specifically around 407 BC.
Which is very close to Nehemiah's time.
It is. The Jewish soldiers there had built their own temple to Yahweh, which was destroyed in a local conflict. So they wrote letters seeking political and financial support to rebuild it.
And this is where it gets interesting.
Right. One of the letters from 407 BC explicitly states that they have sent a message to Delaiah and Shelemiah, the sons of Sanballat, the governor of Samaria.
Which is huge.
It completely corroborates his existence, his title, and his timeline. He is not a localized, petty rival. He is a recognized governor within the Persian administrative system, whose sons are handling international diplomatic correspondence just a few decades after Nehemiah's wall building.
And understanding Sanballat's true political weight reveals the magnitude of the crisis in Nehemiah chapter 13.
How so?
Well, the high priest, Eliashib's grandson, had married Sanballat's daughter. This is a political earthquake. The highest religious official in Jerusalem is forging a marital alliance with the governor of Samaria.
So when Nehemiah physically drives the grandson away.
Right, he is not merely enforcing abstract theological purity regarding intermarriage. He is executing a severe, decisive political maneuver to sever an alliance with a rival regional power.
And the consequences of that expulsion were permanent. Josephus and later tradition connect this expelled priestly line to the eventual founding of the rival Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim.
It created a lasting schism.
The expelled grandson, who possesses legitimate Aaronite priestly lineage, is taken in by the ruling family of Samaria, laying the groundwork for a formalized, competing center of worship.
Next, we have Tobiah the Ammonite. The term Ammonite here is likely an administrative designation rather than just an ethnic label.
Like a title.
Yes, he was a Persian authorized official operating in the Transjordan. The extra biblical evidence for his family's power comes from the Xenon papyri, dating to roughly 260 BC.
So quite a bit later.
Yes, but these documents detail the activities of a wealthy descendant named Tobias operating in the same region. This proves that Tobiah belonged to a powerful, long-lasting aristocratic house that maintained regional influence for centuries.
And finally, there is Geshem the Arab. He is connected to a figure named Gashmu in North Arabian inscriptions.
And he is a major player.
Yeah, he is associated with the Kedar Tribal Confederation. This was a massive coalition that controlled the highly lucrative trade routes running from northern Arabia up through the Transjordan and to the coast.
So we have to synthesize this data.
Yeah, let me jump in here and ask you. If these men represent Samaria to the north, Ammon to the east, and the Arab trade routes to the south, what was actually at stake for them? Why did a wall in Jerusalem matter so much?
Because the wall was a massive regional political disruption. For decades, Jerusalem had been weak and unwalled. The surrounding powers had established trade routes, administrative borders, and patronage networks that relied on Judah remaining a porous, defenseless territory.
So a fortified, independent Jerusalem threatened all of that.
Completely. It disrupted the established flow of goods and taxation. Furthermore, Nehemiah was a governor appointed directly by the Persian king. His presence, backed by a wall, meant Judah could assert its own borders and ignore the influence of Samaria and Ammon.
So the opposition to Nehemiah was not driven by simple religious animosity. It was a calculated response to a major shift in the balance of regional power.
Moving from the political reality, we come to our third analytical question, the theology of the text. Specifically contrasting the covenant renewal in chapters 8 through 10 with the unraveling of those reforms in chapter 13.
Right. We discussed in our previous deep dive the theory proposed by H.G.M. Williamson.
That the reading of the law originally happened elsewhere?
Exactly. He argued that the reading of the law in Nehemiah 8 originally followed the events of Ezra 9 and 10. But regardless of its original historical sequence, its current placement in the text creates a highly specific narrative effect.
It changes how it feels.
The reading of the Torah now takes place safely inside a physically bounded, secured city. The external threats posed by Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem have been mitigated by the wall.
So it creates a protected space for internal spiritual renewal.
Yeah. Ezra reads the law from a wooden pulpit from morning to midday, while the Levites circulate to translate and explain the text.
And the initial reaction of the people is to weep as they recognize their failure to keep the commandments. But Ezra and Nehemiah instruct them to celebrate instead.
Which is a beautiful moment.
It is. The theological meaning here is that conviction under the law should lead to joyful covenant renewal, not despair. This transitions directly into the restoration of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, observed at a level unseen since Joshua.
Following this, the community seals a formal written covenant. They commit to keeping the Sabbath, forgiving debts, paying tithes, and avoiding intermarriage.
It is the theological high point of the narrative.
It is.
Yep.
Which forces us to ask, why include chapter 13? If the editors wanted to present a triumphant story of restoration, why not end at chapter 10? What is the theological reality being communicated by ending with the failure of chapter 13?
I think the inclusion of chapter 13 is an admission that covenant faithfulness is never a state achieved once and preserved automatically.
It takes work.
Constant work. When Nehemiah returns from the Persian court, the erosion is total. Tobiah is literally living in a room in the temple. The Sabbath is violated, and the Levitical singers are forced to farm to survive.
And Nehemiah's reaction is just visceral.
Yeah, his visceral physical reactions, throwing furniture, shutting gates, striking men, illustrate the sheer effort required to maintain order.
Unlike the Book of Chronicles, which ends with the forward-looking, optimistic decree of Cyrus, Ezra-Nehemiah ends with exhausted vigilance.
That's a great phrase, exhausted vigilance.
The book's final note, "Remember me, O my God, for good," is the plea of a man who recognizes that restoration is an ongoing labor that lapses the second vigilance relaxes.
And I want to explicitly signal to you here that we are now moving from established scholarly data into interpretive synthesis. We're taking the genre of the memoir, the historical reality of the opponents, and the theological tension of the ending, and using them to answer our capstone issue.
The unity question. Is the Ezra-Nehemiah corpus one book or two?
Let us weigh the evidence.
Okay, the evidence for unity is largely grounded in the ancient manuscript tradition. The Masoretic text treats Ezra and Nehemiah as a single book. The Septuagint translates them as a single book.
Rabbinic and patristic testimonies also refer to them as one work.
Furthermore, scholars like Tamara Eskenazi argue for literary unity based on structural elements. She points out that the near-verbatim duplication of the settler list in both books acts as a deliberate structural bracket meant to unify the text.
Conversely, the evidence against single authorship relies on textual analysis. James Vanderkam argues that the duplicated settler list actually implies two separate compositions that were stitched together.
And Williamson's argument too, right?
Right. H.G.M. Williamson's argument regarding the editorial relocation of the Ezra Memoir points to multiple hands shaping the text. And Jacob Wright's analysis of the Nehemiah Memoir as a layered, expanded document suggests a highly complex compositional history that defies a single author.
So where does that leave us?
The modern consensus sits between these two poles. We are reading originally distinct source materials, specifically two separate memoir traditions. These distinct sources were deliberately interwoven by an editor.
So the unity is real, but it is a constructed editorial unity.
It is a theological statement by the final editor, designed to show two contemporary reformers working complementary sides of restoration. Nehemiah the governor builds the physical wall, providing security. Ezra the scribe teaches the law, providing spiritual renewal.
The editor weaves their narratives together to argue that the preservation of the community requires both the practical administration of the state and the rigorous study of the Torah, even if historically the two men may never have crossed paths.
As we draw this deep dive to a close, we want to shift our focus to a devotional reflection. Looking at this text through the lens of the restored gospel, there are principles here that speak directly to the lived experience of maintaining covenants today.
I think we have to start with the role of grief. When Nehemiah receives the report in chapter 1 that the walls of Jerusalem are broken and the people are in distress, he does not immediately start drafting a construction schedule.
No, he doesn't immediately leverage his political connections either.
He sits down, he weeps, and he fasts. In our faithful communities, there is often an immense pressure to move straight to solutions. When failure or tragedy occurs, the impulse is to immediately fix it, to demonstrate resilience and faithful optimism.
But Nehemiah teaches us that unhurried grief is not an obstacle to productivity. It is the very thing that prepares a person for the work. His prolonged mourning aligns his heart with God, clarifying his purpose before he ever speaks to the king.
Acknowledging the brokenness of the walls, whether those are literal walls or the spiritual walls of a family, a community, or a personal testimony, requires a period of honest mourning before rebuilding can begin.
We also see a profound lesson in vigilance and labor. The image from chapter 4 of the builders working with a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other is one of the most enduring symbols in the text.
It's so striking.
They are under severe strain, facing daily threats from regional powers, yet the construction continues.
This speaks directly to the reality of sustaining a testimony, building a marriage, or magnifying a calling. You cannot wait for a period of perfect peace to do the work of discipleship.
Right.
Sustaining a covenant life requires holding vigilance and productivity simultaneously. You cannot choose between defending your faith and building your family. You must do both at once. You have to work while holding the weapon, acknowledging the opposition without letting it halt the labor.
Which brings us to finding grace in incompleteness. Chapter 13 is a difficult text because we want the story to end with the triumphant covenant renewal of chapter 10. The unraveling of the reforms feels like a failure.
It feels like they lost.
Yeah, Tobiah is in the temple, the Sabbath is broken, the tithes are ignored. But the unraveling of the reforms is not a failure of the covenant. It is an honest acknowledgement of what covenant life actually is.
It is an ongoing labor that must be continually tended. The weeds always grow back. The walls always need repair. The natural entropy of human nature means that spiritual decay is a constant factor.
And this connects us directly to Jesus Christ.
How so?
Look at Nehemiah's final prayer. Remember me, oh my God, for good. It is the prayer of someone who gave everything he had to an imperfect, unresolved outcome. He is exhausted, the reforms are fraying, and the community is still struggling.
We can take deep comfort in knowing that Christ's remembrance of us does not depend on whether our personal walls stayed perfectly standing or if our personal reforms held flawlessly without a single lapse.
His grace reaches us in the incompleteness itself. We are remembered for good because of his infinite grace, not merely because of our exhausted vigilance.
He sees the labor, honors the intent, and his atonement compensates for the unraveling we cannot prevent. That is a profound place to conclude our analysis of the text.
I agree.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on the history we have discussed but that we haven't fully explored today. Consider the deep irony and tension of Nehemiah's life. He is a Jewish exile, utilizing the resources, the timber, the military protection, and the political authority of a foreign pagan empire, the very empire that holds his people in subjugation, to physically rebuild the kingdom of God.
He uses the administration of Babylon and Persia to construct Zion.
I invite you to ponder what it means to rely on the structures of the world to build sacred holy spaces in your own modern life. The tension Nehemiah navigated is a tension that exists in every generation of believers.
Next time, we will be moving forward in the Old Testament curriculum.
Until then.